The following podcast is offered freely through the Insight Meditation Community of Washington and by Jonathan Foust. To learn more or to make a donation to support this work, please go to www.jonathanfoust.com.
So an old man is on his deathbed, and his wife of 55 years is sitting next to him. And he looks over at her, his eyes are moist, and he says, "I'm just beginning to recognize what a poor husband I was. That I was controlling, I was bossy, I would have anger outbursts. I was a real jerk. So, but in all our years together, you never got angry. How is that possible?" And she paused and she said, "Well, I would just go and clean the toilets." And he said, "I don't understand. How does cleaning the toilets help you with your anger?" And she leaned forward and patted his hand and said, "I used your toothbrush." Last week we talked about the art of balance, finding balance in our lives, and I've been thinking about what is it that pulls us off balance. And strong emotions are certainly one of those factors that inevitably draws us into a sense of confusion and feeling deeply out of balance. So I thought I would talk about one of the most intense emotions, which is anger. How do you transform anger when it arises? So we thought we might track the arising and the releasing of anger just as we would track the four main principles of Buddhist philosophy, Buddhist psychology, the Four Noble Truths, in four parts. The first, that it happens, anger happens, suffering happens, anger happens. The second truth, that there is a cause. There is a cause of suffering and there is a cause of anger anytime it's arising. And the third truth is the cessation of suffering or the cessation of anger. It's possible to let go. We'll talk a little bit about some of the technologies for how to do that. And the fourth is the path. The practices, the teachings, the observances that cultivate the release of suffering or the release of anger. I think many people have a concept that anger is bad and it's not supposed to happen to spiritual people. In the ashram where I lived for a couple decades, we unconsciously lived by that concept. And what it did is it created kind of a sense of what we could call premature transcendence. We're supposed to be beyond anger. And so inevitably there'd be these subtle moments. So like, oh, I guess it's fine that you just cut in front of me in the food line. You must have some unmet need for nutrition that's more important than mine. Oh, that person who just got that position for which I'm much more qualified, that's your friend? Well, it must have something to do with my karma. I'll have to take a deep look and see how I can surrender. Needless to say, when our community melted down, the shadow erupted. This incredible volcano of resentments and hurts and jealousies that never got to be processed. To not acknowledge our shadow, to not acknowledge the strong emotions and the lessons that they have to teach you, can be rather unskillful. When we can actively investigate those strong emotions to find out what the deeper lessons are, to discover the cause, they can actually lead to liberation, to a greater sense of happiness, a greater sense of aliveness. And when you think about it, how many times today did you experience some form of aversion, some form of irritation, anger, blame, judgment? Chances are there was a real play of phenomena in your life that set off some kind of reactive pattern. And it's not necessarily good or bad. Anger is not necessarily good or bad at all. It's how you react to it and how you hold it. There's a lot out there now on trauma and releasing trauma. And trauma can really be seen as kind of the simultaneous experience of two things. It's anytime you feel fear and you feel helpless. That induces a trauma response. And there, of course, there's big trauma, being shot, being in an accident, being in some catastrophe, and then all the little cumulative experiences of feeling fear and feeling helpless. And there's an energetic component to that. In fact, the energy can feel overwhelming. And part of when we feel strong trauma, we're overtaken by that energetic experience. The three manifestations are fight, which will be some form of aggression, or flight, some form of disassociation, or freeze, where you simply lock up inside. And I think we all have our particular patterns of where we tend to go. Some people are more inclined toward the fight mechanism, those who are outraged waiting to happen. And some of us are more inclined toward disassociation or freeze, but inevitably when the conditions get intense enough, we'll have some deep form and some manifestation of anger. And for many of us, we're afraid of our anger. We're afraid of what we might do. The feeling is just so strong. So when you're angry, you have, of course, angry thoughts. But as they say, your issues are in your tissues. The anger manifests on the inside. So how is it that you would know that you're angry? Chances are you're experiencing something in your physiology that's giving you those messages. Your muscles tense up, your breath gets more labored, more rapid, your body temperature rises, the blood is shunted away from your belly out to your limbs so that you can react, your eyes dilate so you can see more clearly, the adrenals kick in, the liver produces more glucose, more blood sugar so that you can react faster. And in extreme cases of anger, there can actually be a loss of hearing and tunnel vision because of the intensity is so strong. Your whole physiology is in a reactive mode that's designed to keep you alive. So that whole physiological response is very helpful when you're encountering wild animals in the woods. But most of our stressors are psychological now. If you have a meeting or a conversation that you're dreading, you have a deadline that's looming, worried you don't have enough money, your body still believes that you are under dire threat, and you go into the same reactive pattern. Unexamined anger means we simply repeat the same patterns over and over and over again. When you practice mindfulness, the best definition I've run across is non-judging awareness. That when you have the capacity to actually examine anger or strong aversion without judgment, it's a very different approach, and new possibilities can arise out of that. So anger happens. Life happens, we react to it. And which leads us to examining the cause. Well, what is the cause of that anger? Not too long ago, I was working pretty closely with a woman who had some issues arising with her mother. Her mother was in early stage Alzheimer's, and she was slipping pretty fast. And through her life, she was not very close to her mother. They did not have a strong bond. So she had some distance. She did have some siblings, but that was complicated because she had a brother who just vanished from the scene. She had another sister who complained that she was overwhelmed with her own family and had no time. And her other sister was even more reactive to her mother than she was. So the whole situation was on her. She felt financial issues, she felt time issues, and just the stress of having to be with someone who needed constant supervision. And it just didn't look like it was going to get better for a long time. So she came to explore what she could do with this. Because this overwhelm she was feeling, she could feel it really encroaching on her well-being and her health. So we explored the story a little bit, the narrative, which is helpful. But then we turned our attention to the actual felt sense experience of it, of what it was like for in her body to hold that experience. And as you can imagine, she had all kinds of feelings. Of course, there were emotions, but there are also feelings in the realm of pure sensation. Her body was in reaction. She noticed feeling very, very tight around, kind of in the core of her body. She felt a sense of really profound emptiness around her heart, just kind of a void around her heart. She was aware of kind of a hypervigilance, kind of a racy feeling inside. And also a sense of groundlessness, like just feeling there was no up or no down. And we'll explore how she worked with that in a little bit. But I wanted to kind of pause and talk a little bit about when you experience anything that's between you and feeling free. Any strong emotion, any strong reaction. It's quite powerful, just as we do in meditation, to move from the cognitive, from the story, to the direct experience. And we'll talk a little bit about how that works. So Tara and I were talking last night as we were beginning to fall asleep about this talk, and she said, well, what really gets you angry? And I said, I'm not really a very angry person, but, and she said, well, when you drive. I said, yeah. And I said, the only thing that really gets me is there's one particular political party that really gets me going. And I started to describe it, and within 5 minutes I was enraged. So when we do some exploration of anger, you might not want to do this part if you don't want to get too activated, or just choose something, you may feel some mild aversion just to try it on. So I'd like to lead a little reflection on something you might feel some sort of aversion toward. But I thought about all the different forms of anger or different forms of aversion. So as you're thinking about this, you might try on these other synonyms for anger. Anything that gets you steamed, annoyed, PO'd, cooked, hot under the collar, irritated, cross, vexed, hostile, irked, indignant, enraged. It goes on and on. Piqued, acrimonious, displeased, exasperated, in a huff, feeling antipathy, having bad blood, bad chemistry, hard feelings, feeling displeased, put out, incensed, miffed, having a conniption, and my favorite, peeved. Just as the indigenous people have all these words for snow, isn't it interesting how many different words we have describing all the different flavors of aversion? Tony Robbins tells this great story of how in his company, someone really tried to screw them over, and he was in a rage, and he looked around, and everyone else was angry except for his CFO, who was from Great Britain, and he said, "Aren't you just outraged?" And the CFO said, "Well, yes, I'm peeved." And Tony Robbins said, "Peeved?" And as soon as he said it, it sort of changed his experience. So he said from then on, whenever he was outraged, he would say, "I'm really peeved right now." So I've tried that one. It works quite well. So if you like, let's do like a little 1 minute reflection. If you like, you can close your eyes and just bring into mind something with which you felt some form of aversion or judgment or blame or anger. And take a moment to sense if it feels okay to investigate this for a little bit. It might be helpful to visualize it if you're a visual person, or recall the auditory, any words that are spoken. And then take a few moments just to notice, what does it feel like inside? How intimately can you contact this felt sense experience on the inside? Can you locate it? How intimately can you locate it? And is it possible just to be with it, as if you were just sitting with it on a park bench, just letting it know that you see it? So you might deepen your breath, and when you're ready, you can let your eyes open, or you can remain with them closed. So we'll come back to this in a few minutes. But it's very helpful to, when you begin to investigate something strong, such as anger or a strong emotion, to recognize it, to name it. And sometimes there can almost be a little bit of a shift just in naming what's there, letting it know that you see it. The transformative process, as far as I can tell, is all about shifting from your story to where you feel it on the inside, and exploring how to be with it. Different questions that we'll explore in a little bit that can open up some new possibilities. So just as anger happens, it's helpful to explore the cause. And generally there's something going on inside. So we're going to talk about that next, and talk a little bit about the cessation or the release of anger. So as I was exploring with this woman and the whole dilemma of how to be with her mother and her family through this very, very intensive time, we explored the process of RAIN. Many of you are familiar with it, R-A-I-N. It's really kind of the alchemy, or one of the main pieces of how we can deeply investigate what's between you and feeling free. The R is to recognize or realize what's there. The A is to sense if you can allow it, make room for it, accept it. Sometimes you can't, particularly if it's really strong. It can feel too overwhelming. Another time when the conditions are different might be more appropriate. The I is to be intimate with it, to investigate with kindness. The N part of this equation is a sense of non-identification. It's a real shift from feeling something very intensely personal to being able to sense it with a little more space, a sense of non-grasping or non-judging awareness. So for her, part of the recognition was to tell her story and to take the time to really acknowledge just how hard it really was. And through that process of just recognizing this is it, it's such a powerful practice that we engage into in the practice of meditation. You move from your story, from your preferences, from your embellishments, to the direct, raw experience of what's actually happening. It takes huge courage. And then we explored the element of allowing. When I asked her, did it feel okay to open to this, to investigate this a little bit more? As she began to describe her experience, of course, she began to recognize there was a huge amount of guilt for the resentment she was feeling. A lot of self-consciousness about how unskillful she was being in the process. But she said, yes, it was okay. The investigation piece. And in many ways, this is kind of what sets mindfulness meditation or vipassana meditation apart from pure concentration practice. In concentration practice, you have a task, focus on the breath, mind wanders, bring it back. In this practice, when something very strong arises, you can move from your anchor to investigate the phenomena itself. So this is the practice of having tea with your demons, to really sit down and lean into and investigate with intimacy what's there. And again, it takes tremendous courage. It also takes a lot of different factors to move into this. But she was ready. As she began to explore the felt sense experience of this dilemma, she began simply to name what it felt like. The deep, deep wrenching in her gut, her fear of the unknown, of what was going to happen, the resentment, the anger she had toward her siblings, the feeling of being utterly alone in this process. And giving that time to feel it and to name it. Another important part of the practice is to call on compassion, to call on kindness. So as she began to name these raw experiences, these raw emotions, part of the inquiry was, is it possible to hold that with some kind of compassion or kindness or empathy? And as she actively engaged in this practice, as if she was beginning to peel an onion, just naming all the different pieces. It took time to unwind the fear, the overwhelm, and the terror. But she began to recognize the source of that anger. Under anger always is some unmet need. There is something you are needing or wanting or hoping for that isn't happening. There is some form of clinging or holding always at the source of your suffering or your anger. And she realized that what she needed was time away. She needed time to restore herself. She needed time to back off so that she could remember her mother's goodness. And part of that was realizing that she needed to make some clear requests to her siblings, that she needed help. She recognized the reality, the truth of her situation was that she could not do it by herself. So we examine how we're holding our experience. We examine and sense What are we needing here at the core? We can also explore what we're believing, how we're holding it in the mind. And I asked her, what's the core belief here in this situation? And she said, I'll never get through this. And so we did a process which I won't dive into in full detail here, but identifying a core belief can be very, very powerful. To sense what it's like when you believe it, to really inquire if it's true, and to ask, who am I without that belief? And for her, there was a real sense of deep release when she inquired, who am I without this belief? I'm not going to get through this. For her, she began to move through something that felt so tight and so overwhelming by continually naming what's here, sensing if she could allow it, being intimate with it, being kind with it. And she began to sense some possibilities where they didn't exist before. So I thought perhaps we might just try this on, just for the next few minutes, if you like, to see how this technology might work for you. So if you like, you can close your eyes. And this will be just for a few minutes. And you might again draw your attention back toward any particular issue, maybe the one you were focusing on earlier where you felt some form of aversion or judgment or blame or anger. And you might, in your own way, just recognize or realize this is here right now. And you might sense, can I allow this? Is it okay to be with this for the next few minutes? And just sense if that feels right. If not, you can turn your attention to something else. And exploring the I, the investigation, the intimacy, you might just sense, where do you feel this? I'll offer a few questions over the next minute or so. How intimately can you feel? Is it possible to offer this some form of compassion or kindness or empathy? And how does it move or shift or change when you do so? Can you sense for yourself the unmet need? What were you wanting, hoping for? Is there a sense of what is the core belief you're holding around this particular issue? And is there a sense of who you are without that belief? What would that feel like? What would that be like? You might gently deepen your breath. In your own time, you might let your eyes open, or you can remain with them closed. And this process of unwinding, of course, takes time. But in essence, this formula can be very helpful. Recognize or realize what's really going on. sense if you can allow it, and then investigate, be intimate with it, have tea with it. Explore what it's like to bring empathy and kindness to all those different sensations and emotions. Sense if you can the unmet need, what you're hoping for, what you're wanting for. It can cultivate a shift over time. Marshall Rosenberg, who developed nonviolent communication, he said, when you're angry, there are three things. The first is you're not getting your needs met. There's something you're wanting, there's something you're hoping for that's not happening. The second is that you're blaming someone or something for not getting what you want. There's some blame, some externalizing. And the third is you're about to react in a way that you might regret. And those three elements are always there. So he offers some steps, a slightly different approach. I like this first one. He said, when you feel anger arising, think of it as the red light coming on in your dashboard. Here's a little warning sign. The second is to look clearly at what happened. And this can be very powerful, to look clearly at what happened. What exactly happened? From your point of view, from the point of view of the other. The third is to take responsibility for how you feel. And be honest about your unmet need. Then, he says, do the same process for the other person, if it's a conflict with another person. What is the other person needing? What's their unmet need? What were they wanting? What were they hoping for? And then explore what it's like to communicate around that. There's so much beautiful technology in nonviolent communication, which we've explored, and I'm happy to dive into again. There's a classic story of anger from the Buddha's time. There were these gatherings of monks at different places at different times of the year. And there was someone who learned that his one person from his clan had left the clan and gone to become a monk under the Buddha. And he was really, really angry. So he went to see the Buddha. And as soon as he arrived, he just abused him, with really harsh and hateful speech. And then the Buddha responded, and he said, do you ever receive visits from friends or relatives or other guests? And this man said, yes, sometimes I do have visitors. And the Buddha said, when they come, do you offer to them various kinds of food and a place to rest? And he responded, yes, sometimes I do. So, but if your visitors do not accept what you offer, then to whom does it belong? He said, well, if they don't accept it, then these things remain with me. And the Buddha said, and it's just so in this case. When you revile us, and we do not revile you in return, when you scold us, and we do not scold in return, when you abuse us, and we did not abuse you in return, we do not accept your hatred and anger from you, and thus it remains with you. So there's something very powerful about when anger comes at you, how you hold that experience. Is it possible to not receive it? The Buddha also spoke of how when you respond in anger or hatred, it's like picking up a hot coal from the fire to throw at someone. And you don't realize until later that the one who's being burned is you. So examining anger can be quite powerful. And this leads to the path that releases anger, the path that releases suffering. There's sort of this concept that many people have that the Buddha's life after his awakening was filled with bliss, that he was just sort of untouched by the world. But there was a huge conflict during his lifetime. There were family members that were set against each other, declaring war on each other. They would have to mediate. He started all kinds of monastic communities with lots of immature people coming to practice. So the communities were filled with jealousy and turf battles. And it's said that when the Buddha had his awakening, he did not want to teach. His first reaction was, no one's going to get this. No one is interested. But then he thought of some people he had practiced with, and the words are translated as, well, there are a few people with just a little dust in their eyes. So he went to teach and engaged into the teachings. When the Buddha spoke of the three characteristics of reality, he spoke first of anicca, or impermanence. Anything born out of causes and conditions is subject to change. He spoke of dukkha, or stress, suffering, dissatisfaction, that anything you try to hold on to, anything you try to control, will result in some form of stress, dissatisfaction, or suffering. And he spoke of the third characteristic of reality, of anatta, or the teaching about not self. Your body is born out of causes and conditions. Your thoughts, emotions, beliefs, all born out of causes and conditions. So what is it in who you are that is beyond causes and conditions? This is what we begin to awaken to in meditation. When you develop your capacity to witness, to observe without judgment, you begin to see your life as a flow. You begin to see what's arising, and you begin to see with more and more clarity and intimacy how you're holding your experience. And hopefully, as time goes by, there is more and more of a capacity to respond to life rather than to react to life. The teacher Muji had a beautiful teaching where he said that when we say, I am angry, that's not true. What we're really saying is, I am with my anger. You are not the anger. Awareness is not angry. Awareness is not sad. Awareness is the space, the consciousness that is aware of the phenomena of the rising and falling. He says, ask yourself when you're angry, to whom is this happening? Can I find the one who is angry? And if you slow down and look, you cannot find any particular point that is angry. It keeps shifting. And that clarity of seeing or experiencing is so much more profound than trying to think it through. He said, if you follow this, don't say it shouldn't happen. It has happened. Find the space that can allow you to experience, to allow this. So oftentimes, in meditation practice, we're cultivating equanimity, the steadiness that allows you to be with anything. And inevitably, in my years of practice and being with those who are practicing with real sincerity, a lot of time, anger erupts from undigested experiences. It has very little to do with what's actually happening in the here and now. It's an old memory, an old hurt, an old betrayal coming to the surface to be felt and seen and heard. And more, you can cultivate who you are as the awareness of all this phenomena, to allow it to open and to allow it to flow. Anger is energy. It's neither good nor bad. When you think of anger as the warning light on the dashboard, it can be a call to a very different way of being with it. To shift from blame and externalizing to slowing down, to recognizing what's there, to acknowledge what it feels like on the inside, and to look in your own way to identify that unmet need. When you can move to that unmet need where you're hoping for what you're wanting, it'll take you into a very vulnerable place, but it'll take you into a very deep place of recognition and truth. So let's close with a short meditation, a little reflection here. You might, in these final minutes, just slow down your breath. Take a moment to sense and acknowledge everything that makes up who you are that is subject to change. This body is changing. Moods, emotions, thoughts, beliefs, all subject to change. Who are you as the one who is aware? And imagine if anger were to arise, or a strong emotion. What would it be like to recognize it, to let it know you see it? To pause and to have tea with that phenomena. To sense the unmet need. To cultivate a quality of compassion, kindness. When we can practice this, two factors inevitably arise. The arising of wisdom, of your capacity to recognize what is true. The second quality is the arising of compassion, of your capacity to be with and to let go into the mystery. We'll close just over this next minute. You might in particular draw your attention to this realm of compassion, this natural arising that occurs when you can practice non-judging presence. Your capacity for kindness, for compassion, for joy, and for equanimity. Not just for yourself, but for all living things. And as you're ready, you can deepen your breath. And when you're ready, you can open your eyes. Thank you for your kind attention. May you and your anger, or what's left of it, have a wonderful evening together. A few quick announcements. If you'd like to be on the mailing list and you're not, you can sign up in the back.